Hi everyone. Well, I sort of thought about this a bit differently to Peter, and I'll talk for a minute or two about what ASIC does. But this was, when you're normally asked to give a speech, you say yes at the time, and as the day gets closer, you think, oh, damn it, and better start preparing. But this one actually caused me to be quite reflective for the last week or so and really start to think, well, what is it that makes relationships between regulators and the consumer sector work? And when do they work well and when don't they? So I hope I'm not going to end up sounding like Pollyanna, but I just thought I would let you in on some of those musings for the last week or two. Okay, but first just a little bit about ASIC. ASIC, as most of you know, is the company's regulator and the consumer protection regulator for the financial services sector. We've had those consumer protection responsibilities for about a decade now. And in terms of how we go about consulting and interacting with the consumer sector, it's done at many different levels. We have a formal consumer advisory panel in which we seek to have an independent chair and representatives from the key stakeholder peak lobby groups. So from Choice, from the Consumers Federation, from Shareholders Association. We also have a more general advisory body which has members of industry and the consumer sector feeding in. Each of the key organisations has a stakeholder manager, so we're talking regularly. And I think probably the smartest thing we do is we actually try and pinch the eyes out of the consumer movement and employ them, which keeps those sort of channels operating well. And I'm sure Alan will drill down when he starts questioning us a bit more into the details of all of that. But I thought I'd let you in on my musings about when do relationships really work and what's important to get the dialogue happening and the trust happening that we need to have between regulators and the consumer sectors. And at the risk of starting banal, I really think it has to start with respect. And respect comes in part from understanding the shoes each other walks in. What are the limitations and the strengths and weaknesses we each bring to the table? A part of that comes from getting to know each other. I know a lot of people have a range of stereotype views of public servants, but in my experience, most regulators and people I've worked with are there because they want to make a difference, they want to do good. Fairly similar reasons to reasons why most people become consumer advocates. And I think if you start off by realising that in many ways we're all on the same page, but we bring different skills and tools to the process, some of us choose to work within the system, others outside of the system, then that's already starting at a better basis for a dialogue than an us and them sort of mentality. I think the next really important thing is ongoing communication. I so often see misunderstandings happen between regulators and the consumer sectors. Somebody says something out of context or it's taken out of context and things can very quickly get blown out of all proportion. So my number one lesson and takeaway probably from nearly 20 years of interacting with consumer groups is if something's causing a problem or an issue on either side, pick up the phone and talk to each other and really keep that open dialogue and sense of trust going at all times. The next thing is around honesty. And being open with each other. I mean, obviously, sometimes we're constrained by sort of privacy and other confidentiality issues, but to the extent possible, always explaining why you're doing something, why you can't do something, and what you bring to the table. So if you look at the consumer sector, there will be a wealth of knowledge about what's going on in the ground, what individuals are experiencing on the demand side. There may be a scarcity of resources, though, to back that up with the sorts of research that's needed. If you look at the government side of things, there will be restrictions about what you can do. You're confined by legislation, you're confined by confidentiality, you're confined by organisational priorities. But when you start off by each understanding where the other's coming from, it's much easier to find the grounds where you can work together and where you can help each other. I hope that's making sense to people. The second thing I think from a regulator's perspective is the importance of actually following through and taking action. If I look at our consumer advisory panel, which on the whole I think works fairly well, and I know quite a few of you in this room have been on it at various times over the years, so you can tell me if you disagree. One of the things that we do at each of those meetings is to ask each person to come to the table with 3 things that they're seeing in the community that are causing them concern. And one of the rules we have for us as ASIC is where we've been brought a case or where we've brought an issue and asked to do something, we either make sure that we do it, or if there's a reason why we can't do it, we explain it and look for another way of actually dealing with that particular problem. I can't stress enough the importance to regulators of having that constant input from consumer groups. If I look at our area, I think of a number of the important issues that we've taken on in recent years, which the first sort of signs of need came to us through the consumer movement. I think of issues around mortgage brokers. I think going back to things like Bookup. The first we saw those problems wasn't through our complaints processes because people weren't calling us. It wasn't through the EDR schemes because they weren't reaching them at that stage. It was through on-the-ground financial counsellors, credit legal centres saying, this is happening, you need to do something. Getting together, us putting the funding in to support some decent research there, because that was one of the things the consumer sector lacked at that stage was the finances. I have to say, I think it's very nice you've been given $2 million. I'd love to see $2 million given to the consumer sector in our area. And working together in those ways. Now, what else did I want to say on this one? Look, I might just leave it there. So those are just some of my musings about how you try to make things work and work well and productively so we get positive outcomes for end consumers in how we as regulators and you as consumer groups actually interact on a day-to-day basis. So thank you.